welcome to the third in the series where I'm talking about potentially being able to join a coven. Today, I'm going to be talking about some of the main misconceptions in Wicca and witchcraft and some of the questions that people have asked me over the years. So the first question that I often get asked, and this is not necessarily from people who are already Wiccan or in witchcraft, but people who come from the outside in or are looking from the outside in, will sometimes ask the question, are we Satanists and do we worship Satan? So the very short answer to that is no. I'm not going to go into a lot of cosmology and theology in this video, other than to just merely say, for brevity's sake, no, we are not Satanists. That's an entirely different religious structure. Another very common question that I get is, are all British traditional witches Gardnerian? And the answer to that is also no. If you watched my last video where I talked briefly about traditions and I gave you a very large overview and broad sweeps of British traditional witchcraft or British traditional Wicca, where I explained that there are different branches of witchcraft and that not all witches who come from the New Forest are Gardnerians. Is there an age limit to Wicca? And the answer to that is, there is a minimum age when you are coming into witchcraft or Wicca. That really depends, I think, on the country that you're in, the province that you're in, and perhaps the tradition and coven that you want to join, because most witches will wait until you are the age of majority before they allow you to join their coven, to train with their coven even. Now, that age of majority can differ across the world, but in general, I would say that most people are unlikely to take you into their coven unless you're already 21 years old or older. Is there a maximum? And I'm going to say, for me at least, no, there's no maximum age of when you can actually start in witchcraft. How long does it take to get initiated? So when you are training with a coven, that is really dependent on the specific tradition again. And I feel like I'm saying this a lot, but a lot of this is dependent on the tradition, the coven, and the coven leaders. And then the other very important factor to keep in mind is that it's also dependent on you as the student learning. Your progress will take as long as it's going to take. But I would say that on average, in many British traditional covens, probably the average time would be the concept of a year and a day. Whether that's followed to the exact date is debatable, because again, it depends. Now, related to this, I just want to very briefly touch on those that are Wiccan born. Now, what Wiccan born means is that you are born to parents who are Wiccan, or to one parent who is Wiccan. Generally, then you are brought up in that religion, because remember, Wicca, and especially in the traditions that I follow, and British traditional witchcraft, that is a religion. So you are born into a specific religion and you are taught about the religion as you are growing up, pretty much like you would do if you belong to any other religion. Do covens curse people? Now, what I want to say is that there is no mandate or taboo, in my understanding, on whether or not you are permitted to curse people. And this is going to lead into my next question that I often get asked. But what I want to say is that in general, covens have other things to do. They have work that is important to the specific coven. They are doing their rituals, sabbats, esbats, and personal work, growth, and learning. They certainly don't have time, and probably not even the inclination, to run around cursing random people for no good reason. So the next question is concerning the concept of harm he none in Wicca or the threefold law. And people often ask, do all witches follow the threefold law? Do all witches believe in the concept of harm ye none? And the short answer to that again is no, not all witches believe in that concept. And many other authors have done a much more credible job than I would be able to do in this one video, talking about that concept, where it originated and so on. So I suggest that you look at some resources around that topic if you're really interested in finding out. But the short answer to that is no, not all witches believe in that concept. Another very common question that I get asked is Is there a requirement in initiatory witchcraft for you to have sexual relations with your initiator? And the answer to that is that there is no mandate in British traditional initiatory witchcraft to engage in that in order to become initiated. So related to the previous question, what I would say is you should have a discussion with the leaders of the group and find out more about the tradition before you even consider joining them. Find out if that is something that they choose to engage in, or if that is something that their particular group would require you to do. If that is something you are not willing to do, then I would say go and find a different group. Use your discernment and your good judgment, because you are probably at this point all adults wanting to get into Wicca and witchcraft. You are quite free to join different groups, and you should be using your good judgment and your discernment to avoid situations that you are not comfortable with. Nobody should be forcing you to do that in order to become initiated. Will coven leaders or tradition leaders tell me who I should vote for, who I should be in a relationship with, what I should wear, and so on? And the answer to that is absolutely not. Coven leaders don't have that type of authority. You are a sovereign individual, so you will not or should not be told what to do. If that is the case, then I think you should consult some of the guidelines in recognizing a cult. What is going to be expected of a seeker? And many people ask, well, what is going to be expected of me as a new student? And I would say that that really depends on the coven leader. But for me, at least, I think the things that I really look for are people who are serious about joining a tradition. They are dedicated, hardworking, and willing to put in the work to be able to know themselves better. They are willing to do their assignments and things like that. So I would really require somebody to be dedicated to their own growth. Remember that every person initiated into Wicca is a sovereign individual, and most of the time when you are initiated into a Wiccan tradition, you are initiated as a priest or priestess. You are an autonomous human being. You are sovereign and responsible to minister to yourself. So you are responsible for yourself, and you are responsible for your own growth and development. So never think that you should hand over your sovereignty and autonomy to another individual. When I am a new person joining a coven, am I going to have to be the general dog's body or do all the grudge work for the high priest and the high priestess? Do I have to do their laundry, mow their lawns, or clean the temple, or any of those things? And I would like to say that that doesn't exist, but I do know that it does sometimes occur. Is that something that should occur? The answer to that is no. In general, you won't be doing that. Some people are under the impression that when you join a coven, you will lose your autonomy and that the coven work may interfere with your solitary practices. Now, this is definitely not the case. A coven work will support your solitary, or what we sometimes call your hedge witch practices. Those are your solitary practices, the ones that you do on your own. You will always, as a witch, also be engaging, and probably most of your work will occur on a solitary basis. But when you are in a coven, the coven work is not going to interfere with what you do in your private solitary practices. What a coven will do, or what coven work will do, is it will support those private solitary practices. Will I have to work with specific deities like gods and goddesses? And what if I don't like them? And I think the answer to that is that you are always free within your own solitary practice to approach gods and goddesses in the way that works for you as an individual. It is a rather tricky question, because when we talk about things like that, we have to address cosmology and theology and very in-depth topics, things that I really don't have time to get into in this video. But what I will say is that the answer to that question is it depends on the coven. I've also heard people say things like, Well, what if I want to just skip ahead and get initiated into a third degree? Or people that have the concept that initiations are somehow a badge of honor or a gold star for progress and whatever. What I want to say on this topic is that initiation is really just a beginning of something. It is a beginning of a new stage. And as you progress through the degrees and the typical like 3-degree system that exists in British traditional Wicca, for example, at each of those degrees, you have a lot of learning and development to undergo as an individual. And I don't think that any responsible member of the High Priesthood would skip over those degrees and give you a third degree, because what comes with that is a lot of hard work, a lot of personal work, a lot of knowledge, skill building, and understanding that you need the foundation for in order to progress within yourself. So would you be able to just skip right up to a third degree? I would say in general that's not going to happen. Will it be hard work when I join a teaching group or a coven? And the answer to that is most probably, because when you are doing anything that's new or worthwhile doing, sometimes it is hard work. When you are learning a whole lot of new things, then it's hard work. And what you do need to understand, and that's kind of related to that question, is that when you join a Wiccan coven or a teaching group for a Wiccan coven, you are learning an entirely new concept or construct and an entirely new system of cosmology, theology. You are learning an entirely different religion. You cannot exchange a religion like Christianity or any other religion and just sort of exchange the god for the goddess. That's not how it works, because you are literally learning a whole new construct and an entirely different religion that has different precepts, axioms, and belief systems that is very different from mainstream Christianity. And I'm only using mainstream Christianity as an example here because most of us that live in North America and the Western world are very steeped in mainstream Christianity. A lot of our social systems are based on mainstream Christianity. So what I wanted to say about that topic is that, is it going to be hard work? Probably. A lot of the hard work, though, is actually internal hard work. The work that you're going to do on yourself in order to grow as an individual, to get to know yourself, because that's really one of the most important jobs, in my opinion, as a witch, is to know yourself. Another very common misconception about joining a Wiccan coven is that you are instantly going to have friends and that it is a social group. So these are actually two different questions, actually. So I'm just going to address them as two separate questions. A coven is not a social group. And I think I've sort of addressed this elsewhere, but a coven is not a social group. Will you eventually make friends within that coven group? The answer is most probably yes. Will those people eventually, and when I say eventually, I am talking about probably years and many years in time, where you do grow close bonds and friendships with people that are in your coven, so eventually they might feel like family. Is that something that is an absolute necessity to joining a coven? I would say probably not. The likelihood of you becoming friends and having a friendship group within that coven is probably high, but you know, when you are in a coven, you are working harmoniously with other people. You are trying to find a balance in that coven situation, and eventually you will make friends. But is it an instant friendship? No, that's just not even a realistic thing in the regular mundane world. So I don't see why it would be in a group like a coven. Is the high priest and high priestess or the tradition going to tell me what to do in my solitary practice? Again, I kind of touched on earlier, and the answer to this again is no. We're not going to tell you what to do in your solitary practice. That is entirely up to you. The only thing that a high priest and a high priestess, or the only things that a high priest and a high priestess are responsible for, are leading the rituals, teaching new students, and things along those lines. We are not responsible to monitor what you do in your solitary practices. That is entirely something that you are in control of. Of course, we would hope that you would align yourself with the principles, tenets, axioms, and basic philosophical constructs and belief systems in our religion, but that is something that is entirely outside of our purview. Do all witches follow the common, I would say, witchcraft aesthetic? I think it's kind of obvious, but I'm going to just mention it anyway. The answer is no. I would say that most of the witches, and I'm going to almost sort of go almost all of the witches that I know, would probably never dress in that stereotypical social media type of witchcraft aesthetic. It doesn't mean that nobody enjoys dressing like that or would sometimes dress like that, but you know, like in our traditions, we wear robes whenever we do our rituals. So in that way, we already kind of dress like witches because we are witches, but we aren't going to necessarily follow that the witchy or witchcraft aesthetic necessarily, because most people that are witches out in the world, you would never actually be able to recognize them by what they're wearing. Related to that is there a standard dress for witches within a coven? Now, again, it depends on the coven, but I'm going to speak from the Horsa and Sacred Pentagraph perspectives only. Yes, there are specific robes or colors of robes and cingulums or cords that we would wear within our tradition, and sometimes this will also reflect the rank or the degree that a person has been initiated into. So in that case, when you are in a coven, you would dress according to the tradition's specifications of robes, for example. But I think that that is not necessarily the case if you are practicing Skyclad. So again, it really just depends on the specific tradition. Are there classes when you start off as a seeker in witchcraft? And I feel like I've said this too many times already, but again, it kind of depends. Now, in my covens, the Coven of the Northern Lights and Coven of the Northern Wolfer, we do have more formalized classes for new seekers, but that's probably only because our covens are fairly new in the grand scale of things. And in general, our traditions, covens tend to be very long-lasting, of many, many years, and still many continue since even the 1960s. So those covens are more established and they don't necessarily always take on many new students at the same time, whereas newer covens tend to have more students, and so it's very difficult for newer covens to have one-on-one classes with a whole lot of different people, simply because we have limited time and many people also have full-time jobs, so it isn't practicable to have that one-on-one new seeker type of interaction. So we would follow what I would say is typically the concept of an outer court system, where we would do rituals that are for outer court with our new students, and we would teach them in a smaller group situation. But that really depends on the coven, because I know that there are many covens who would do one-on-one because they don't have a whole lot of positions available in their coven, or they might be only training one or two people every few years, or whatever the case is for the individual coven. So are there classes? Again, it depends on the coven. Do you pay a fee to study British traditional witchcraft specifically? And that's the only one I'm going to address because that is relevant to me and my traditions, and also to Gardnerian and some of the other branches of witchcraft. The answer is no. You will not pay a fee if you are a student who is working towards the potentially being initiated. You will not be paying a fee for the classes that you attend. Sometimes you may be asked to contribute certain supplies that you would be actually using in your classes, but that's very few and far between, and I would barely ever ask my students for anything in any case. So is there a fee? Yeah, the short answer to that is usually no. How often do you meet? And that really depends on the individual coven and also perhaps even the individual tradition. Because even within my traditions, the answer to that is it depends. Again, because it depends on the coven, how often they have chosen to meet. Like in our coven, we would maybe meet for Sabbats and Esbats and classes. How often those occur really depends on the circumstances at the time. I think I've covered most of the questions that I get on a fairly regular basis, and I covered one or two that I received comments on in some of my other videos. If you have any more questions or some of the things that you might like to bring to the fore about some of the misconceptions about Wicca that you may have had or some of your coveners may have had if you're a coven leader watching this video, then I would really love it if you put it in the comment section below and perhaps we can address that and talk about it. I love having interactions with people and talking about these things, so don't be shy to put that in the comment section. If you enjoy the content, please like and subscribe, and I hope you are well. Blessed be.